Guys, I wanted to make this video because I had a couple people ask about reliability and validity questions. So I wanted to clear up a few things and maybe give you a little bit more information than the book. I'm hoping this helps. Let me know if it does not. Okay, so first of all, I want to tell you what I'm going to talk about. So we're talking about reliability and validity. We're going to go over test, retest, iterator, and internal reliability. And for validity, we're going to cover face validity, content validity, criterion validity, which includes convergent, discriminant, predictive, and concurrent validity. Okay, first of all, we're going to talk about reliability. Consistency is key here, okay? Now, this is basically how consistent a test is over different testing periods, right? There's other ways we're going to talk about in a second, but test retest would be, let's say a student took the SAT and then the next weekend they took the SAT again. They should not get radically different scores. If the test is reliable, it should be similar scores each time, right? It shouldn't be vastly different. Inter-rater reliability. So if you have two teachers with equal knowledge and they have an essay test that they need to grade, they should be giving similar scores when they have a rubric. Two critics with equal education and experience should not vastly disagree on movie quality based on a specific measure. So if they're supposed to say, what's the cinematography like in this movie? Well, two really seasoned critics should be able to give you really close scores. So it's like judges when you're watching the Olympics, they give different ratings for different things. They typically don't diverge too much from one another because they have specific criteria they're going over, so this should be similar, right? Okay, and finally, internal reliability. Okay, this specifically is related to self-report scales. You'll see this a lot in psychological research. Their items in self-report scales should really kind of stick together, okay? The items are intended to measure a specific construct. So if I were to agree with one item, I should agree with another item as long as that's the way they were coded for me to do. So the case comes up where something might be reverse scored. So it's basically what do we expect them to do. So if someone's high on interest, but this question asks them in a specific way where when they actually disagree, that means they're high on interest. So that's still sticking together with the other questions, okay? I hope that makes sense. But internal consistency is one that you're going to see often because it's a lot of times written within the article. So as a Chromebox alpha, that's typically the one they report. However, there's other ones, so like they might say McDonald's Omega or something like that. But typically it's Chromebox alpha, and 0.80 or higher is really good. 0.70 to 79 is adequate. If you have something like 0.9 or above, that's very good. But you don't want lower than that. Lower than 0.70 is not as good, okay? But it's still reported, and but this is basically helping people judge the quality of the research, okay? So in this article, this is like a clip from an article that I have. And this is where they talk about Chromebox alpha, which is this right here, this symbol. So they say the key dependent variables were intermixed with questions pertaining to personal training program. Attitude toward the program was measured as an average of 2 9-point scale items. So instead of like a 5-point Likert scale, they have a 9-point scale. So they're telling you how it was measured. 1 is not at all. They didn't like it at all. 9 is very much, okay? And their reliability was 0.65 for this specific measure. So it's not as good as it should be, right? So it's like, well, how much can we trust this? This isn't horrible. There's been worse, but this should, this might just be like this for this sample. So it could be, you could resample. It depends on how many people were in the study, all kinds of things. So, okay, so purchase intentions were measured by 2 9-point scale items. So there was only 2 items for this, and this only had 2 items, right? So typically we like to see like bigger scales with more than just 2 items anyway. But here the reliability was really good, right? So 9.93 is a lot better than 0.65. But this is something the researchers are supposed to report, and the way they measured things, they're supposed to report this so we can judge the quality of the research. All right, so external validity. This is, does this generalize to other groups at other times? So if your population of interest is college students in America, you don't want students from outside the US because of different cultural, the difference in culture that could affect your results. And besides, it's not your sample. Why would you go outside of the US to get your sample? Adults not in college. So if you're wanting to generalize to college students, you really should get college students to be in your sample. High school students, okay, these still not college students, their age could and experience could be problematic. Harvard students would also be probably not as good of a sample as you'd want. Better than, say, some of these others, but not quite as good because they typically might have a high GPA. They probably have a lot higher socioeconomic status, so they're not really applicable to the average college student, right? So you want your sample to represent your population as closely as you can. So if you are trying to represent males, then you wouldn't want your sample to be females, right? So that's really important to remember. How does your sample reflect the population? Does it? Is it representative or not? So you have to think about those things when you are gathering your data, because they're super important to be able to say, well, these findings can generalize to the population because. So, okay, and other types of validity, so when we're talking internal validity, does this measure what it claims to measure, right? So probably the weakest type of internal validity would be face validity. So just looking at the questions, does this look like it's probably relevant? So on a quantitative reasoning item on SAT or GRE, you wouldn't expect to see like an English question. That wouldn't make sense because it's not really measuring, quantitative reasoning, which is what you would expect that portion of the test to measure. Content validity. So are all parts of the construct represented? So in my studies of interest, they typically divide interest into like affective components, so like emotion, but also value components, so how important something is, and cognitive also plays a part. But so I need to make sure when I'm looking at a specific interest scale that they do have components of both the affective quality as well as the value quality. All right. So if it's only focused on the affective quality, then I would have to make sure, because there are theories out there that interest is more of an emotion rather than, doesn't have a value component. So if I was going with that theory, then my measure should probably theoretically focus on emotion. But basically, you just want to make sure that your measure has all parts of the construct covered, right? All right. Now there's criterion validity. So is this measure associated with key outcomes that it should be associated with? For example, someone with a high IQ should get a higher GPA. That's just how it should be if IQ has a good internal validity, right? Convergent validity, math test scores compared to SAT quantitative reasoning scores. So these things should be related. They should be positively related. And basically, kind of stick in the same direction, right? So if someone scores high on their SAT quantitative reasoning, they should also score high on their math tests, right? That makes sense because these two things should be measuring something similar. Now, discriminant validity is a little different. So scores on a self-esteem measure should not theoretically be similar to scores on a measure of interest in music. They have nothing to do with one another. So therefore, they should not be measuring some other part of some construct that doesn't relate. Okay? So basically, these things are not measuring the same or similar constructs, so they should not be related. And then predictive validity, if IQ measures intelligence, then it should theoretically be able to predict college GPA. So this is, if this score can predict something that it should be able to predict, then it has predictive validity. And finally, concurrent validity. Now, I don't think these last two are, I'm not sure if they were actually mentioned in your book. I'm looking through the book. Different books talk about validity in different ways, so I'm hoping this can give you another perspective and possibly clear up information that you read in the book. But a score that should be able to differentiate between certain groups. So an IQ test that has concurrent validity is able to differentiate between someone who is considered gifted versus an average student, right? So that is one of the reasons that the IQ test is helpful. It should be able to, it's one of the more helpful things to differentiate people who might need more assistance or people who are gifted and might need more challenge in a classroom, okay? So you should not have similar IQ scores for people that are gifted and lower intelligence, right? I hope that makes sense. So a measure of depression should be able to distinguish between depressed people and non-depressed people. Guess I forgot the N there. Non-depressed people, if it is concurrently valid. I hope that makes sense. If it does not, please let me know. I can clear up anything that you have questions about, but I hope this was a little bit of, if not a refresher for this little section, hopefully it clarified something. But I will talk to you guys soon.